So, hello everyone. As I'm sure you're already aware from probably the words over here, as well as Eleanor's wonderful introduction. My name is Professor Max Neal, and I'm based here at our London campuses. I teach across all three. I do various things: undergraduate, postgraduate, and executive education. My main focus is working with senior leaders to improve their resilience and improve their performance. And one of the biggest things that I've found over the course of my career that gets in the way of leaders really performing at their best is procrastination. The idea that we know exactly what we should do, we know exactly what we want to do, but then we don't just quite do it. So one of the things that's been really interesting to me, especially as somewhat of a procrastinator myself, is how do we change that? How do we stop procrastinating? How do we become more productive, and how do we get more done? How do we reach those longer term goals? Because I think that procrastination falls into two camps, right? There's the obvious procrastination, which is scrolling through your YouTube, scrolling through your Netflix, and going on social media. But there's other kinds of procrastination as well. There's the procrastination where we put off thinking about futures, where we put off thinking about big careers. We forget about the really important stuff to do what's urgent right now. And so that's what I want to talk to you all about a little bit today. Is I want to talk to you about how we can start to rethink procrastination, both in terms of understanding it, but also in terms of how we deal with it. So that's hopefully what I aim to bring to you guys today. But I'm going to take you through a session purpose very, very quickly first. But I always have a little bit of a problem when speakers at events like this, they put up a session purpose and they tell you this is what you are going to get out of today's session. They tell you this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to learn, and it annoys me. It doesn't annoy me, but I kind of think, well, why are you guys here? So this is what I'm really interested to know when we start as we start off. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a Mentimeter very, very quickly. It's a very, very short poll, and it's just to know really why you're all here. So if you would like to head over to the website menti.com, and then when you get there, type in that code 9263 2128, and then you've got a question on there. I'll post that in the chat for you. For you now, so that you've got it. So there's the code, and the website is www.menti.com. But if you want to head over to menti.com, type in that code and then answer this question. I would like to know why you are here. So I've given you 6 options. The first one is that you are procrastinating from something important. I thought it would be there might be 1 or 2 people that are here doing that, and you can select multiple options as well. You don't have to just pick one. You want to understand why we procrastinate. You want to learn how to procrastinate less. You're just interested more generally in developing your personal and professional skills. You're really interested in psychology and human behavior, or there's another reason completely different to what I've just posted that you can post in the group chat. Lovely. We've got some coming in. Okay, excellent. And like I said, you can of course select multiple. You can select multiple as well. Lovely. Okay. So we've got quite a few of you interested. I'm glad that we have 7 of you that are very much my people. They are here at a webinar about procrastination because they are procrastinating. Don't worry, I feel that on a spiritual level. I love to see that. I love that we've got 8 of my people here. Brilliant. Okay, so we've got some people that want to learn how to procrastinate less, generally about developing your personal and professional skills. A couple of you interested in psychology, excellent. And then some of you that want to just understand why we procrastinate as well. Brilliant. Okay, so we've got lots of responses coming in, and I think that an important thing for me is that I'm responsive to what you would like to know. So I've prepared some stuff on all 3 of these things, but I think we'll focus a bit more on some of those strategies and how we can procrastinate less more generally. Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone, for your initial participation and letting me know. So this is what I hope that I can give you, and I hope that it lines up with some of the things that you've identified. So what I hope to give you from this session is that I want to give you a bit of an insight into the understanding of why we procrastinate. What is happening at a psychological level that causes us not to do what we want to do? On top of that as well, I want to give you a bit of insight into your own personal brand of procrastination, because procrastination is not created equal. We don't all procrastinate in the same way. And that's because there are different psychological drivers of procrastination. And finally, as a couple of you have asked for, I hope to give you some tools to help you procrastinate less based on the psychology and neuroscience of procrastination. I hope to give you some tools in which you can procrastinate less in the future. So what we need to do is we need to start off with understanding the traditional approach to procrastination. And the traditional approach to procrastination, or solving procrastination, is that procrastination has traditionally been associated with poor time management, right? Poor scheduling. And so methods of dealing with or fixing procrastination have typically focused on, giving people better scheduling tools. I remember when I was doing my undergraduate in university, and I said to my advisor, look, I've been struggling with procrastination. And what he did is he handed me a calendar with 1 hour slots. And what he did is he said to me, what you need to do is you just need to plan out enough time to browse social media, schedule your day better, and you'll be fine at procrastinating. So this is the thing that people used to say. Robert, by the way, Robert, I saw your message in the chat earlier about Geneva and Lausanne. I'm incredibly jealous. My grandparents lived in Tonon, so I spent a lot of time around there. I'm very, very jealous. My aim: to abandon to-do lists is one form of procrastination. Absolutely, Robert. This is what we call a productive procrastination, and I'll talk to you about it a little bit later, about how you get rid of that specific type of procrastination. But this is the problem. Now, what we do is we focus on, creating a to-do list or writing out a schedule, because that will solve procrastination, right? So if you just, plan these things into your schedule properly, the things that we procrastinate with, and make sure that we have enough time to do our work whilst planning when to enjoy ourselves, procrastination sorted. Now, what do you think? Do you think that's right, or do you think that's wrong? I've got a really quick poll for you. I'm going to relaunch that for you. I'll relaunch that for you now. But what I'd like you to know, it's a very, very simple yes or no. It should have just popped up in your Zoom. Do you think that procrastination is just an issue with time management? I shall let you all vote very, very quickly, yes or no. We're fairly evenly split at the moment. Interesting. That's most of us voted. I should give you about 10 more seconds. Okay, that's about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 left to vote, and I will stop the polling there. I'm going to share those results with you because we're fairly evenly split on this. We're about half and half. Half of us believe that procrastination is a problem with time management, and half of us don't. Well, I am in the camp that doesn't agree with that statement. I don't think that procrastination is just an issue with time management. In fact, I don't think it's an issue with time management at all. And I'm going to explain to you, based on psychology and based on neuroscience, why I think that. And more importantly, how we can design better strategies than just procrastination. Jash Karan, this is a brilliant point that you've just made in the chat. Even though we have a good schedule, we don't implement that schedule effectively, and this gets to the real heart of the issue. That is such a brilliant comment, and it starts to understand the psychology behind procrastination. So let me explain to you. Why that. I'm going to stop sharing those results with you now. Please do close down that poll when you're ready. So I don't believe that that's the case. Fundamentally, based on all of the neuroscientific research over the last 20, 30 years into procrastination, what we know is that procrastination is an issue with emotion management rather than time management. And I'm going to try and make this case to you all today. I want to try and convince you, to try and bring you around to my way of thinking on this, with the aim that this will inform better strategies for reducing procrastination. So in order to understand that, we need to understand a psychological concept called our affective state. Our affective state is a very, very general term. And what it essentially describes is roughly how we are feeling, whether that's positive or whether that's negative. So, for example, if you feel happy, that is generally a positive affective state. If you feel sad or guilty or nervous, these are probably more of a negative affective state. Affect essentially just means emotion. It's a fancy psychological term for emotion. Also gets incredibly confusing when you talk about effects, affects, and effects of things. But anyway, our affective state is how we feel generally in any given moment. And there's a great theory about cognitive appraisal that states that our affective state is to do with our environment, and more specifically, 6 particular things about our environment. So I'm going to talk you through these really quickly and how they relate to procrastination. The first is how pleasant our environment is, right? We sometimes call this emotional valence. So if we are, for example, in front of a stimuli, let's use procrastination. Watching Netflix is fun, we enjoy it. However, cranking out that piece of work when you've got a deadline, you don't particularly like it, that's pretty negative in terms of pleasantness. You might enjoy finishing, but you might not enjoy the actual task. So we call this emotional valence, but basically it's whether or not something is nice. Do we like this event, this object or person? And funnily enough, high pleasantness usually results in a high affective state. On top of that, we also have certainty. And certainty is the degree to which an event will happen or not. And as humans, we really dislike uncertainty. So ordinarily, if something is likely to happen, if we can predict something, if we know something is going to happen, usually, and there are a few exceptions, but usually when there is high certainty of an event, we have generally positive affective states. When we know something is going to happen, when we're able to predict the environment well, when we avoid uncertainty, we like this as humans. Of course, the obvious caveat to that is something is definitely going to happen, and it's definitely something you don't like. That's the caveat, right? If you know you have a date that you have to go to court for a speeding fine or whatever, then you know that that's going to be negative. So that's the obvious caveat to that. But normally, as humans, we love certainty. So high certainty, high affective states. Controllability, again, this is how much perceived control we have over an object, situation or event. The important thing here is that I say perceived, because a lot of the time, this is not an objective measure, right? We don't know definitively, and a lot of this comes from the stories that we tell ourselves about how in control we are. And if we perceive ourselves to have high control, ordinarily we will have positive affective states. The next one is attentional activity. How much attention does something grab? And this is found in both positive and negative, but normally the thing that is negative that catches our attention is normally going to cause a negative affective state, like fear. Also, how much effort we have to spend on something. If we have to spend a lot of effort on something, normally we avoid it. We are creatures of habit. We love spending as little energy as possible. Evolutionarily, it was a huge benefit for us. We wanted to be as efficient as possible. It's something called the law of least mental effort. If we have 2 potential options and one of them will cause less mental effort, we will pick that one almost universally. So when things have a high anticipated effort, if they don't have a high pleasantness as well, we tend to avoid them. We tend not to like them. The final one of these is agency. And this is how much personal responsibility do we have for the creation of a situation? Is it our fault? And similar to attentional activity, we find this in both positive and negative affective states. So let me explain to you why this is important when it comes to procrastination, because we can appraise, we can understand most situations, most decisions, and most events in life through the lens of these 6 different dimensions. So let's have a look then at something we might be procrastinating on. Let's take, for example, look, I mean, just off the top of my head, let's say, for example, you are running a virtual skills lab on the topic of procrastination, right? Just hypothetically. And let's say, for example, that this virtual skills lab is due to happen in 2 or 3 days' time. And you're really thinking about, okay, what's the best way of explaining this in the new format? Now, this would be because you're kind of, you don't know whether it will go well or go badly. The pleasantness of sitting there and grinding out and doing that task is probably quite low. Certainty, I don't have to do it right now, but it is definitely going to happen in the future. It's definitely within my control. A lot of high anticipated effort, and I am absolutely responsible for this task. Now, in the short term, this creates a negative affective state because it's difficult. There's no right answer. It's not like I can tick a box and it's done. So in the short term, this creates a negative affective state, right? We want to avoid that. Fundamentally, as humans, we want to avoid those negative emotions. Negative emotions doesn't necessarily have to mean sad. It can just be, for example, the fact that we don't like the task that we're doing, or we find it difficult, or it's uncertain, or anything related to that. Right? So we have a task. Let's say this is any task that you procrastinate on. We have a task to do or a decision to make that is producing a negative affective state. So a negative emotional state, a negative emotion towards it. Whether that is short term, I just need to get it done, and then I'm going to really enjoy doing the presentation, as with our hypothetical example, or it's predicted. Doing this task is going to be negative, like filling in your taxes or something else. So instead, let's have a look at the task that we procrastinate with. Let's say it's, again, hypothetically, I've no experience of anyone who would do this, but hypothetically, you doom scroll through Twitter to read various things. Now, this has, because I'm not exerting much effort on it, and I follow a lot of, this hypothetical person follows a lot of funny accounts, it's quite a pleasant activity. Again, there's a lot of certainty. I can control what I scroll through and what I read. There's quite a lot of intentional activity because it demands a lot of my attention, quite a low level of anticipated effort, but also a low level of agency. I'm less responsible for it. So what it does is it shifts that affective state. And this is fundamentally what procrastination does. It shifts us from a positive affective state, short-term or predicted. But the problem with procrastination, especially when it becomes chronic, is that it creates a negative affective state in the long term. And this is something we call a hedonic shift. Now, again, this is a fancy psychological term, and I'm going to explain it in a bit more depth very, very shortly. But the hedonic shift essentially means when we avoid negative emotional states in favor of more positive ones. So let me explain this and break this idea of hedonic shift down a little bit more in terms of procrastination. So we experience a negative affective state, regardless of what it is. On top of that, we then appraise a task negatively. We think this is something that I don't know how to do it. I might not be good at it. I might be shown up as an imposter. I might not be able to deliver at the standard that I want to. Whatever it is, we appraise a task for a negative reason. What we then do is we make decisions, conscious or unconscious, to reduce that negative effect. So our negative emotional state. And as a result, we get procrastination. And rather than the fancy psychological term of hedonic shift, my favorite term to describe this comes from Diana Tyson, brilliant work on procrastination and emotional regulation. She called it giving in to feeling good. Because that's fundamentally, as humans, we want to do. But this presents a real issue to dealing with procrastination. And I'll tell you why. What we do is we often tell ourselves to just suck it up or get on with it, or blame ourselves and blame our willpower, or should I say lack of willpower, for procrastinating. We make it our fault. But unfortunately, this is hugely unhelpful to procrastinating less. I'm sure you might have experienced this, right? Where let's say if a few of you are big procrastinators, where you've got a deadline and that deadline is rapidly approaching, and you find yourself on your phone and you have that voice in the back of your head that says, what are you doing? You should be working. You should be getting on with it right now. But then you just see your thumb continues to scroll through your phone. And that voice in the back of the head is going, what? What are you doing? But what we do is that creates a guilt, and that voice in our head is hugely unhelpful with dealing with it. So let's understand why. Why is this so unhelpful for dealing with it? Well, this is the problem. Negative affective states drive procrastination. The more time we spend in negative affective states, negative emotional states, the more likely we are to procrastinate. So negative affective states drive procrastination. Then our negative self-talk about procrastination creates more negative affective states. Then the procrastination becomes worse because we seek to avoid that negative affective state through hedonic shifts, this idea of giving in to feel good. And finally, this becomes a negative spiral of poor decision-making and detrimental affective states. And this is why procrastination can become disastrous. It can become an absolute nightmare because we deal with it in the wrong way. If we just think about it, let's say, for example, Robert is an example in the chat, which is, creating a to-do list. ticking a box. Yeah, we're doing something, but it doesn't deal with the real procrastination. It doesn't deal with the real affective states. It just becomes, as Robert said, another form of procrastination. So what I want to understand is whether or not we all procrastinate in the same way. Because if we want to fix this, we need to understand how we procrastinate. So we're going to head back over to Mentimeter, because I'm quite keen to know some of the things that you do. So head back to Mentimeter, just use the same code, use the same login, and this time it's an open text box. Don't worry. By the way, this is completely anonymous. This information will not be fed back to your manager. This information will not be fed back to your supervisor or anyone else. But I'm really interested to know, how do you procrastinate? We've already got a brilliant example from Robert, which is creating to-do lists. But head over to Mentimeter. You've got an open text box. Put that in there. Prof Neal, please give the book reference to Giving Into Feel Good. So just to let you know, all of my references are down the bottom here. Everything that I talk about has got a psychological backing. I've got a psychological backing, so it's all listed down here. But this is Giving Into Feel Good by Tyson Bratzlaffsky, and it's in psychological inquiry. I tell you what, Robert, drop me an email and I can send you a link to the. I can send you a link to it as well. Lovely. By doing things that interesting me rather than work that feels overwhelming. Brilliant. I feel like this is me answering. I don't know how you've all hacked my brain to do this. But do anything else that has a rationale. Excellent. We tend to think a lot of the time as procrastination. I've used the example previously of just scrolling through Netflix or Twitter as something that doesn't have productivity attached to it. But yes, you're so right. So often we procrastinate by doing things that they need to be done and they have a rationale, but they're not what we need to be doing, right? Work on the easier task first and leave the hard task later. Excellent. Anything that uses less mental work. Brilliant. An excellent example of the law of least mental effort. Keep pushing important tasks. Keep myself busy until which I have no control over. Do the easy task first. Absolutely. I say that the thing I have to do is boring and instead switch to something else, usually always something useless. This one I particularly like. This one over here, I'm going to highlight this one. I'm going to highlight this one for you all really quickly. I say the thing that I have to do is boring and instead just switch to something else, always something useless. I love this. So this is so often what we see with procrastination, right? Is that we will say the thing that we're doing is boring, or the thing that we should be doing is boring, and instead what we end up doing is we end up Wikipedia pages deep on something completely obscure that is even more boring than the thing itself. But because we haven't attached that boring label to it, we love it. We suddenly find ourselves like, there was one the other day. So I have no interest in this, right? I have absolutely no interest in this. But I was finding myself about 5 pages deep on the history of Wuppertal's suspended monorail, which, by the way, is actually quite fascinating once you get past the initial Wikipedia pages. But I found myself completely deep in it. That is boring to virtually anyone. But because I was labeling my initial thing as boring, it was slightly different. Excellent. I really like this answer. I'm just going to click off this one. Whoops. Let's go back to F11. So let's have a look. By doing something more interesting and demanding, lovely. I just start doing it as soon as it pops up. Then as soon as I do something, it becomes interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Going for instant gratification. Absolutely. This is the thing. Our brains are designed for instant gratification. Our brains are not designed evolutionarily to work hard over a long period of time, right? We're designed for a world, right? This is a really interesting point, this instant gratification. Our brains are designed for a world 60,000 years ago. And let me tell you how I know that. So there was a fantastic collaboration recently between some archaeologists and neuroscientists where they did a joint study together. And what they were really interested in finding out is their research question was a little bit weird. It was, how far back into the past could we go, kidnap a baby, bring it to the future and raise it as a 2021 human, and there'd be no differences, there'd be no problems at all. So they did some fantastic work where they analyzed the patterns on the insides of skulls, and they looked at various different humans and all these things, and the answer is 60,000 years. Our brains have not changed for 60,000 years. but the environment that you operate in has changed a little bit, right? So the environment that our brain is designed for is an environment where, you know, instant gratification was good. It was a world where you find food, you eat the food, and you survive. Whereas now we work in a world where we don't have that reward for instant gratification. We go to work, then we get paid, and then we get money, and we put it in the bank, then we go to the store, we buy the food, and then we eat, then we survive. We don't have the justifications and the rewards for instant gratification anymore. But that's unfortunately not how our brains are wired. Brilliant point, excellent point. Rescheduling tasks by being pseudo busy. I love the idea of pseudo busy. Excellent. Some really interesting points in there. So what I want to focus on is, obviously, as you've all seen, no, we don't procrastinate in the same way. We have different kinds of procrastinators. We have active procrastinators, ones of us who choose to do other things. Those people who are talking in the Mentimeter about I just find something that's busy. Or I just do something that's I create a rationale for doing something. And we usually procrastinate on the important but not urgent things. We get the urgent stuff done. Slightly more pernicious for our productivity and our performance are passive procrastinators that slip into procrastination. There was a great example that highlighted this. That was, I just start doing it. As soon as it pops up and then I do something, it becomes interesting. A perfect example of passive procrastination. And this is where we procrastinate until the urgent becomes incredibly urgent, right? Until we suddenly could, you know, lose our house if we don't get this job in, and don't get this piece of work in, and we lose our jobs. Right. We also have 3 different types of procrastinators, some brilliant stuff from Tim Urban on the procrastination matrix. And I'll talk about these later on. But we have disasternators who will procrastinate to the point where it causes huge problems in house and home. We have impostinators who will give the picture that they're very busy and very important, but they don't get the urgent important stuff done. And the successinators, which find a way to work around their procrastination, which hopefully I hope to give you guys some insight into doing a little bit later as well. But we want to understand why. Why do we procrastinate in different ways? Why do we approach these things in different ways? Well, there's been some brilliant research back in 2012 looking at procrastination at a psychological level, right? And what we've noticed that there are several traits that are positively correlated with procrastination. So the more we procrastinate, we are more likely to procrastinate if we have high levels of, for example, neuroticism, when we are under a significant amount of stress, if we have high feelings of imposter syndrome. So this idea that despite all the evidence, we're not qualified enough, or we're not good enough to be doing the job that we're doing, and we're going to get found out. High levels of perfectionism have the strongest correlation with procrastination. The more we need something to be perfect, the more likely we are to procrastinate on it because we feel we won't reach that, as well as negative automatic thoughts. So this is ideas like, for example, you see someone walk in the street and they chuckle or they laugh, you think they're laughing at you. That's what I mean by negative automatic thoughts. And it was also highly correlated with low levels of self-esteem, low levels of consciousness, and also low perceptions of ability. But the really interesting thing about this review, about this research, is that there was no association with time management abilities. So no matter how good people were at scheduling, if they had one of these psychological traits, we saw more procrastination. But these different traits, looking at all these different things, these different traits leads to different kinds of procrastination. The more of these traits playing at once, the more likely we are to procrastinate. So what we want to understand is how these different psychological traits can cause different types of procrastination. So let's explore. Let's have a look. Now, I'm sure that you've heard of something called the Eisenhower Matrix, right? The Eisenhower Matrix, this idea of, this is a time management tool, and I got given this as a tool to help my procrastination back at undergraduate when I was procrastinating all the time. And they said, right, here's something that's going to help you. And this is the Eisenhower Matrix. You split things up into the urgent and the important. If it's urgent and important, you do it now. If it's important but not urgent, you decide a time when you're going to do it. If it's urgent but it's not important, you delegate it to someone else. And if it's not urgent and it's not important, then you just very simply delete it. Now, this exercise might have worked brilliantly for President Eisenhower, but unfortunately for me as a procrastinator, it didn't do very well. So let's look at what that looked like for me, or me in my current context, right? The urgent and the important, let's say last week, was writing a virtual skills lab lecture on procrastination. I think something that's not urgent but is important for me is learning to code. Something that is not important but you make it urgent is this replying to emails instantly, right? Emails a lot of the time don't need an instant reply, but it's my way of productive procrastination. But not urgent and not important, that is YouTube. That is scrolling through and watching videos, learning and improving. So if you're a procrastinator, what happens? The first one that we're going to look at is a successinator. This idea of a successful procrastinator. What they do is they give the fake impression of success. And by the way, if you're really interested in this, I strongly recommend you read some of the work of Tim Urban on Wait But Why. He talks about this idea of these three categories. His work is absolutely brilliant on procrastination, really accessible, really readable, rather than some of the academic texts, which can be a little bit how do we say denser. So successinators, what they tend to do is that they tend to get the urgent and important done. They get all the urgent and important stuff done, but they also do the not important, not urgent stuff. But what they don't do is they don't do the things that are important but not urgent. So this is about planning your future. This is about thinking about the big picture. This is about doing the things that really matter but don't need to get done right now. The impostinators, they will ignore the urgent and important until it is absolutely urgent at that very last minute. It has to be done. For the disasternators, this is where we see real problems. They don't do all three. And they just focus on that last quadrant, the not important, the not urgent. And this is where it becomes a real problem. And just to let you know, this is related very specifically to my goals, right? So my goals long term is to create a deep learning AI that helps users to learn different things, different skills, different projects by giving personalized feedback that I can turn into a business. I want to earn a living doing a job I love, and I want to keep learning and developing. So keeping learning and developing is this quadrant here, and I justify my YouTube with this quadrant here. Earning and living and doing a job I love, absolutely, it's urgent and important to respond to emails quickly. But if it's urgent and important, this is stuff that, you know, it's getting those projects done. But the problem is, I don't do this, which is fairly fundamental to that big picture goal that I have. And this is where we start to see some real issues coming up. This is where procrastination affects us all in different ways. So the most important thing that I want to get across to you then is with the last little part of my session before we go to any questions and answers. And please do, by the way, if you've got any questions for me, if you've got anything that you'd like to know a little bit more about, do post those in the Q&A box on Zoom, and that way we can I can go through and answer any questions that you have as well. But the really important thing is, what can we do about it? Because I think that was something that you were all interested in at the start of the session as well, and I want to highlight some. I want to give you some practical tools, some things you can actually do, and they fit into three broad categories. They fit into an idea of busying the mind, secondly, addressing the emotion, and thirdly, breaking it down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some highlights of these, and then I'm going to go in a little bit more in depth on each one of these ones. So when it comes to breaking it down, the first thing that you need to do, when it comes to busying the mind, the first thing you need to do is forgive yourself for procrastinating, because as we've seen earlier, that self-guilt and that self-doubt, will kick in, and you're going to have that negative spiral of procrastination. On top of that as well, recognize that the reason why you procrastinate, the reason why you spend time in that not important, not urgent, is because it is fun. It's because it is enjoyable. It's because we like to do it. The most important thing, however, is not to make yourself feel guilty about procrastinating, because this is just going to make things worse. And I'll give you some actual tools and some strategies for doing this in just a second. In terms of addressing the emotion, you need to understand that procrastination is an emotional management problem, not a time management problem. Except that a lot of the time, if there's something important, you're probably never going to feel in the mood to do the thing you don't want to do. I say this as this is something that I always did. I feel like, oh, do you know what? I'm not quite feeling like I can really deliver a really great presentation or really write a really good presentation. I'll do it when I'm feeling more in the mood. You are probably never going to feel in the mood. So what you need to do is break it down. So creating small steps, small actions, instead of scheduling it, what is the minimum that you can do on a project? Not thinking of things as the larger whole, because when we think of projects as this big, large whole, what we tend to do is that we tend to associate negative things to that, right? We tend to think about, we are not going to be able to deliver this, we're not going to be able to do this, we're not going to be able to manage this whole thing. So breaking it down and looking at, like, for example, if you were going to code something, and as you can guess, I have actually been learning to code, so all of my examples are now code related. But if you want to solve a coding problem, right, you don't write a piece of code to create the entire app. You break that app down, you break it down to smaller and smaller pieces, and then you write that code. It's the same with these big bits of procrastination. What are the big parts? What are the parts of this larger whole that I need to do? But as standalone achievements, and make a small thing the first thing that you do, even if you have a hedonic shift afterwards. So even if you do end up procrastinating after doing one thing, brilliant, because it's one thing more than you would have done anyway. So let's break this down a little bit more, because there are two things that you need to do in terms of busying the mind. The first one is recognizing your type of procrastination. So have a think, and next time what I want you to do is consider, as you go through and as you leave this session, when do you procrastinate? What are the times that you particularly procrastinate? What is the work that you get done easily, but what are the times that you find yourself slipping onto your phone or pulling up YouTube or doing the other tasks? As well as, why do you procrastinate? What kind of emotions is it that are associated with that? But be mindful of your type of procrastinator. Are you a disastinator? Do you just get nothing done? Are you an impostinator that leaves things to the last minute and instead busies yourself with the small stuff? Or are you a successinator? Are you ignoring the big picture? Are you ignoring those long-term life goals, creating yourself a vision, doing the things that are important to you that aren't necessarily inside of work? Spending time with your kids, learning a different language, playing sport, getting out and about, doing exercise, all of those things. That is where the successinator is, and it is just as much of a problem as the other two. So be mindful of your type, recognize and acknowledge it when you start to procrastinate, because having the knowledge is half the battle. But also put the blame onto your type. One of the things that as a psychologist, I'm never a huge fan of things like of things like Myers-Briggs and all that kind of stuff as well. I've never been a fan of Myers-Briggs and that kind of stuff, but what they do really help with is that you can blame, right? So I don't know if you've all seen this, but there's there's many memes that go around, like on Instagram and Twitter, where people talk about like being a Scorpio and how it's responsible for various personality traits. It's not, but it allows people to not to internalize those personality traits they don't like. So they blame being a Scorpio. So this is what I'd say is blame your type, right? Blame being a successinator, blame being a disastinator, because then you can start to remove that from your internal view of yourself. Tell yourself new stories about yourself, rather than these negative stories around procrastination. Start saying things about the kind of person that you want to be, the kind of person that doesn't procrastinate. Tell yourself new stories about yourself, and then build this idea of your new self into this next step, which is addressing the emotion. And you need to do two things when it comes to addressing the emotion. The first one is dealing with the negative, and the second one is building up the positives. And by the way, I see a few of your questions coming in now. Please keep them coming. I'll answer those all at the end. Some really interesting questions currently in the open section, so please do send those in, and I'll get those answered. So in terms of dealing with the negative, we need to understand, why are you holding negative emotion towards a task? Negative emotion doesn't just mean that you feel sad, right? Negative emotion means we don't want to do it. Let's say, for example, you can be holding a negative affective state towards something because you believe that something is really important for your career. It might be something that you really want to do. It might be something that you think is really important to do, but there is a worry or there is an insecurity that if you mess this up, if you get this wrong, you could be compromising your career. So there could be anxiety around, for example, is it anxiety about the performance? Is it that you don't really know what you're doing? Is it that you just straight up do not like this task? But we need to understand why we're holding negative emotion towards a task if you want to deal with it successfully. Use CBT principles. So the ideas of modifying behaviors, thoughts, and actions. Behaviors, thoughts, and actions are behaviors, thoughts, and feelings are all interlinked, right? So if we want to change a behavior, we have to change the way that we think about this. All right. And then we can start changing the way we feel about it. But remove the procrastination guilt. It's okay to enjoy doing the fun stuff. It's okay to feel good by knocking out all of those urgent, important tasks. You need to remove the procrastination guilt. Recognize that it is okay. Well, it's okay to enjoy things. Obviously, you want to procrastinate less. Otherwise, we just end up all as disasternators. But then build up the positives as well. Think about the task that you're doing. Why is this task a good thing to be doing? What is this going to get me? Why am I doing this? The best example, my favorite example of this is university work, right? Where we have to write an essay. And ultimately, we all want to be there. We all signed up for it. We all pay a load of money to be at university. Then when we actually have to do the work, we end up procrastinating. We end up doing none of it. Despite the fact we're paying for it, we know why we do it. But this is the thing, we forget why we're doing it. What am I going to learn from this assignment? What am I going to achieve once I've got this degree? Remind yourself of that. And when it comes to building stories about yourself, these are the kind of stories to build. This is why I'm doing it. This is the kind of person I am. This is what I hope to get out of it. On top of this as well, like I said, what do I get out of this? What is my reason for doing this? What will I get if I've done this task? But allow yourself enjoyment, right? Recognize the small achievements. If it's even if it's starting to move towards moving towards an outcome, building up something, recognize those small achievements, which are created by breaking it down. And this is my last point that I'm going to make before I go to some of the questions, which is to build the house and find the bricks. So let me give you a metaphor of building a house. No one builds a house, well, unless of course you're doing something prefabricated. But let's say, for example, you're building a brick house. No one does that in a day. You do it slowly, by putting one brick after one brick after one brick after one brick. If you step back and look at the whole idea of a house and you think, God, how am I going to build this massive house? I've got all these bricks that need to be placed. You just put one brick and then another brick and another brick and another brick. So this is the idea that you don't just build a house, you place brick after brick until you get the whole structure. You need to recognize the small tasks necessary to get to the larger goal. This is if you're procrastinating on something big and the important stuff. But you also need to find the bricks. What are those fundamental small things that you need to do to get you where you want to go? You can do things like, for example, implementation intentions. So implementation intentions are a great tool from behavior change focused on health behavior change. So things like smoking, where what we would have is you would say, if X happens, I will do Y. And it's this idea of thinking about what happens when we're hot-blooded, when we're cold-blooded. So what I mean when it's hot-blooded is that when you are in that negative emotional state, you're not likely to be able to think clearly and think rationally. So you need to do it beforehand. The best example of this is, just before you go to sleep, and you lie in bed and you think about all the things you're going to do tomorrow. You think about, I'm going to get myself into the gym from 10 o'clock till 12. I'm going to be writing the book. Then I'm going to teach for an hour, have a nice bit of lunch. I'm going to eat really healthily. Might go for a little bit of a jog, go for a second gym session in the afternoon, spend some time with the kids, and then I'll watch a bit of TV in the evening. And then you wake up the next day and none of those things happen, right? So what we want to do is think about ifs and whens, rather than what we're going to do, how we're going to go about doing it. If I find myself procrastinating on this one particular task, then I will read a note on my wall that I've put up about the overall goal. So think about those implementation attempts, but also set times and dates. Hold yourself accountable, not for the house, not for the big picture thing, but for the bricks. When are you going to do those small things? When are you going to make those small achievements? So on top of that as well, we need to think about that smaller picture, building up that general picture to get to that larger place that we want to be. The most important thing, though, is to create new urgency. We do things as procrastinators when things become incredibly urgent and important and they have to be done right now. So create new urgency and hold yourself accountable to that. One of the best things that I did for learning to code was to do it with a partner. And we hold each other accountable for it. I know that if I don't do it, I'm going to get a negative affective state because my partner will chew me out and say, you're an idiot. Why haven't you been doing your coding work? So create new urgency and hold yourself accountable. So those are my general tips around procrastination. And I've got a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to go to those. So for an anonymous attendee, we have, can we be different types at the same time? Yes, absolutely. And I would say as well, depending on those, if we go back quite a way, depending on what the overriding cause of that negative emotion is, we're going to see different types of procrastination, right? So let's say, for example, and I'm just going to go back to this slide with where we had that review of some of the literature on this. In answer to your question, anonymous attendee. So let's say, for example, depending on which trait is dominant here, we're going to see different types of procrastination. So let's say, for example, we have an incredibly high level of stress, but we also have a very low perception of our ability. Then you're most likely to be a disastinator. But if you then remove that stress, you're going to see those things change. This is not like a fixed personality type. I know that fixed personality types are useful for understanding ourselves, but where they become slightly less useful, and sorry, I'll just answer live so you guys can see that. Where these questions become slightly less useful is if we think that they are fixed. You're absolutely right, anonymous attendee. We absolutely can be different types at the same time. Depending on what our emotional state is, we have different types of procrastination caused. We might also see this, that we might be like, for example, a successinator in one area of our life and disastinator in another. And it depends what our emotional association is with those particular events and tasks. Great question. I really like this. The next one I'm going to go for is from Roland. So Roland says, what if my procrastination is only when I'm faced with some difficulty I can't address immediately or efficient at the moment? So this is interesting. And Roland, what I'm going to do is, if you're happy to do so, Roland, I'm going to ask you to unmute, because I'd like to know a little bit more about that situation. If, of course, you're happy to do so. So I've just given you permission to talk, Roland. If you want to unmute yourself, tell me a little bit about what you meant by that question, because I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, my question goes, greetings first, the lecturer. Thank you for this time you're taking to take us into this subject. My challenge is generally, I'm someone who used to be really organized, and most of the time I'm planning everything I'm doing. So when I'm going forward with the challenges I have or the plans I have, it's only when I cannot move with one step or the other that I will face myself procrastinating, because, it's like facing a big wall that you can't jump, and you just like, okay, let me take a break and think about how we can go through this wall. So meanwhile, you don't want to face the wall directly. You want to take some time, maybe renewing your mind, maybe taking some break that will help you to come across the wall again and see maybe a hole that you've missed, and you could pass through it. So basically, that's how I think things.
So in that case, Roland, I think that the most important thing to do is recognize that doesn't sound a huge amount like procrastination. That sounds like a really important period of time for you to get away and reevaluate it. Yeah. So there's a really important psychological concept. It's quite old. It's a guy called Graham Wallace, and he talks about the art of thought and the art of how we create new ideas. And there's 4 stages to it. The first one is preparation, which is where we interact with people, we have conversations, we build up our knowledge, we learn, we educate ourselves, we encounter a problem, right? So we prepare. The second thing then is that we have something called incubation. And incubation is this period where we actually take time away from something. The best thing is to incubate is sleep. If we want to have creative ideas, and if we want to approach problems in a different way, we need to give time for things to incubate. One of the biggest drivers of people not being creative and not being able to solve problems isn't they don't just work harder and harder and harder on, right? If they don't give themselves time away. If you ask lots of people, like you ask lots of, for example, artists where they got their idea for a song, they'll tell you a a great story about how it just popped into their head. But if you ask them, no, I said how, they'll say, well, I don't know, it just popped in. And this is the thing, right? If you have a problem like that, it actually sounds like you need to be, the biggest problem is not necessarily the procrastination, but the way in which you are telling yourself a story about having to constantly work on a problem. It actually sounds like it's a really good thing that, especially if you're really organized and really planned, that you're actually getting that time away from it. So I would probably, I'd probably put a bit of a challenge back to you, Roland, to think about how can you start to change your thinking about if you're working really hard on something and you get to a wall, how can you change your thinking that it's more about incubation and solving that problem in a new and creative way?
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you, Roland, because that's a really interesting question, a really interesting way of thinking about that as well. So thank you for posting that.
Professor
Roland,
Max, this
yes,
is Eleanor. We have time for one more question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Scott, the time is flying by. Wow, we've got quite a few in the chat. And we've got quite a few in Q&A as well. There's an interesting one here. There's probably one or two that I can answer relatively quickly, so I'll go with that. So Bahari, I'll answer this one live really quickly. Can I give you references about how to deal with procrastination? When you have a look at the recording, all of my information is referenced down the bottom. I'm a psychologist, so I can't get away with not referencing anything. Have a read through, have a look at the recording and look at those there. On top of this as well, wow, there's some really interesting ones. I'm probably going to finish off with this one. I'm very happy if I haven't answered your question and you would like an answer. Look, I love procrastinating by talking about procrastination. So drop me an email afterwards. I'll put my email in the chat if you want to get in touch with me. But there's a really interesting question here, which is sorry, I'm doing two things at once. This one here from an anonymous attendee: is willpower somehow associated with procrastination? I love this. Yes, but to an extent. As a psychologist, virtually every answer that I give starts with "it depends," right? There's one answer that you can always give at a business school that will always be right, and it is it's got 4 parts. The first thing you need to say is "that's a really good question." The second one is it's all about communication. The third one is "it depends," and lastly, then you say "what do you think?" So you know that a business professor is thinking of an answer if they say to you, "Oh, that's a really good question. I think it depends. It's all about communication. What do you think?" But unfortunately, I have to answer this one. I have to start this one with "it depends." Is willpower somehow associated with procrastination? Indirectly. So the point that I would like to make here is that when you have this negative affective state, your willpower will be reduced, your perceived willpower. So if you blame yourself for not having enough willpower, again, this is going to cause more of an affective state that actually reduces your willpower, right? So willpower is associated, but it's indirect, right? Your willpower will go down as that affective state goes down. So this is what I would say. I think this is the important thing to know. Yes, it is, but don't blame a lack of willpower. It's the negative affective state that causes that. Eleanor, have I got time for one more?
Yes. Okay, just one more.
There's an interesting one. Here. So there's a couple on recordings. My question is, what about in case we procrastinate? Okay, so this is an interesting one. So I'm going to answer Rufa, a really interesting question. What about cases when you procrastinate by constantly switching / shifting tasks / process you are doing? How to fight it? Oh, this is brilliant. And Rufa, this is a really interesting question, because one of the topics that I was debating including in here was some relevance for the virtual world that we're operating in, right? And what we're finding now is that, especially with working from home and studying from home, is that we have a device in front of us and a device next to us that has access to 6 or 7 things that you are interested in, 6 or 7 apps that you are interested in, or 6 or 7 websites that you're interested in, that are literally designed to hold your attention. That is, I mean, if you look at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of these things, they are literally designed to take your attention as much as possible, right? So we find ourselves constantly switching between things and procrastinating. One of the things that I tend to do, for me, because I'm awful with this, is that I use something called focus mode. If it's writing, I use on Word, I use focus mode. One of the things that genuinely helps is I will take my phone and I'll put it out of reach from my computer. I know it sounds like a small thing, but having the option to be able to do it means that we're likely going to take it. I would say it also comes back to the effective state as well. I would say when you're constantly switching between things, it's probably more important that you focus on building up the positives rather than dealing with the negatives. Because what you're probably doing is switching between things because, you know, this one's, you don't really have a great positive association with it. So I would focus instead on thinking about what you want to actually get done, what you actually want to get done, and what's most important, and focus on one task and build up the positives around that task. So for example, this lecture, like I said, I was procrastinating a little bit on writing this lecture, but then actually I thought I love talking about this, and more importantly, I don't have to grade any of you afterwards. So that was the thing that pushed me over into focusing on this and getting this done. So that's what I'd say to that, Rufat. Eleanor, did you want to wrap up, or have I got time for one more?
Okay, so thank you, Professor Max. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but thank you very much for today's masterclass. It was very insightful, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As we said before, a recording of this webinar will be sent out in the follow-up email over the next few days. And if you feel that this was useful to you, we have a number of other webinars coming up. The next being on Wednesday, April 28th. So please visit hult.edu/virtual skills to register. So that's all from us today. And thank you very much for your class, Professor Max. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you again soon.
My
Bye.
pleasure. Thank you for joining, everyone. Bye-bye.